Wow, get used to this thing. I'm a recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. Do you mind if we open with the serenity prayer? Just kind of get grounded. What do we need for a good meeting? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thanks, Renee, for hosting me this weekend, and the committee for having me out. So if you don't like what I had to say, you could talk to them about it, right? But it's always a pleasure to be up here to do service in Alcoholics Anonymous. You guys are in for a real treat. I have a phenomenal story, right? I haven't heard a better story than my own, right? And that's the way your life should be. You should be the most amazed person with your story than anybody else in your life, right? And what is also amazing is the story that I have is the story of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's why my story is so amazing. It's not my story. It was something that was made available to me by responsible members of Alcoholics Anonymous. Not all members of Alcoholics Anonymous, responsible members of Alcoholics Anonymous. And what changed my life is the theme of today's workshop. Everybody hear me okay? Everything's good? Is carry this message is different than a message. Right? There's a big difference between carrying a message and carrying this message, right? A lot of people think it's about carrying their ideas and their message. But when you write a book and put together a fellowship, then you could carry your message and your ideas, right? But this thing was put together. I notice some people have their big books, which is pretty amazing. The title page kind of talks about the story of how many men and women who have recovered from alcoholism. Now, the most important part of that is the story part, right? Because without the story, it doesn't really make sense what they're talking about. But once you know the story, it's a pretty amazing thing that happens here. And when you get to that stage of working with others, we do have a responsibility. Somewhere along the line, the fellowship has changed. It's changed its approach. And why is that? Because there's more people who are looking for this thing or don't need this thing than who have done this thing, right? And there's where it usually goes quiet. Here's where I make friends. And you can tell by the message being carried specifically by people, right? Because our primary purpose is to carry this message to the alcoholic who still suffers. Why? Why is it so important to carry this message? Because we have an hour to deal with somebody who's coming here looking for some answers to why it is they can't get sober, why it is their life keeps looking the same way. Why is it that you people are so happy, right? Like, anybody remember their first meeting? You walk in and what are these people so happy to see me about, right? And we think it's like a life-death sentence here. Anybody? You think our lives are over and all these people are so happy to see me. Not everybody, but certain people who understand our situation, right? People who've been there, done that, right? To imagine where they were the night before, an hour before, to come into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, where they got to that point where they're willing to do something. Either some people are court appointed or here to save their jobs. That's really, here nor there. I mean, I believe there's something at work greater than us that has a lot of us sitting here. Just the mere fact that we're sitting here is living proof that there's something at work. Right, and that's the other thing. So I'm going to hit a couple of these topics. The other thing is we start getting concerned with the idea. I might as well make friends right off the top, right? So we get concerned with my conception, my ideas, and it's not about your ideas and your conception. God as I understand Him is none of our business. It's about your experience, strength, and hope, not your ideas, not your philosophies, not your my religious background and my ideas, right? Because then that creates a separation, right? So when this thing was put together, imagine the amount of input that was put together to put the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous together, right? So it would be all-inclusive, not exclusive. And so usually why a lot of people argue about things is because either they don't have the experience on what we're talking about or they haven't been through this process to be educated on it. Like a lot of people get into the debate of recovered versus not recovering. How many people has read How It Works here? Those who do not recover, right, are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. So then it kind of goes, well, does everybody need to give themselves to this simple program? There's the other qualification, right? Because what's the only requirement for membership? You don't even have to be alcoholic. And we have one of the biggest fellowships in the world, 12-step based fellowships in the world. Why wouldn't you come here for support if you're looking for support? Part of the Big Book Study Workshop we did downtown, and Bill had history with this, and when he got his, from what I understand, his sponsor, the priest, where they started expanding the 12 steps to help marriages and all that other stuff. So a lot of people from other fellowships come to our fellowship for support. How many people find that surprising? Right? Do you think they'd be carrying the same message that we carry within the fellowship of AA, our responsibility? Would they be carrying the same message? Do they have to? So whose responsibility is it to carry this message? That becomes the question. Those who have recovered from this illness, if you're afflicted with it, right? And so carrying this message, there's a whole chapter on working with others, right? And it's a reverse process that we went through. But the interesting part is how many different ways we offer people coming to our fellowship looking for a solution that they don't quite understand the problem to, and they hear a lot of different. How many people sat in a meeting wondering how this works as they're reading how it works? I wonder how this works. And they're reading how it works, right? Because we're thinkers. Any thinkers in the room? See, we don't know that our first obsession is ourselves, because we've never had freedom from ourselves, right? But those who have experienced a different freedom or different understanding see our perplexity or the inability to see anything else other than ourselves, right? So when we get here, most of us are concerned with who? Ourselves, because I got some serious problems. And I'm sitting in a meeting trying to figure out how to solve my problems with the same brain that created it. But I can't see it. So that's why it's not one of those things where they talk about. It's one of those things where you can't. If a better philosophy of life was sufficient, if 417 really worked for people like us, you wondering when I was going to get there, right? If it really worked for people like us, well, what do you mean by people like us? What the book was designed for, right? Because the book was designed, and Alcoholics Anonymous was designed for relapsers, not for people who can stay sober. If you can stay, that's fine. The only requirement for membership is desire to stop drinking. It's not about separation, right? If you were in a lifeboat, right, because the ship sunk, and there was a whole bunch of people in the water, who would be the first people you'd want to get out? Is those that can't swim, right? Those who could tread water, had their own life jackets, or had their own solution. They're welcome in the boat, but your concentration would be those who are starting to go under, who can't get back out again. And that's where they use a reference like that in regards to our solution. So when they talk about this, why is it so important about carrying this message out as outlined in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous? Whose life depends on that? Everybody's in AA? Just the alcoholic. Right? So how would you determine whether someone's an alcoholic or not? That's another good question. And whose job is it to carry this message is the other one, right? So when we look at step 12, what does step 12 say? Having had a spiritual awakening as the result, not a result. Wording is very important how they put together. There's only one purpose for doing the steps, and that's get connected to something greater than us that creates a change sufficient enough for us to recover. Until that happens, what's our fate? We continue to drink, and we eventually end up dying an alcoholic death. Just because you're sitting in a meeting doesn't mean you have a solution to your problem. It's like sitting at the airport. Not everybody's going somewhere, but everybody's there enjoying themselves, right? Some people actually work there. Where are you going? Nowhere. I just like the air conditioning, right? And that's like in the meeting, right? It's kind of like, so whose job is it? Well, the book says it's our job to carry this message. You hear people say, well, but we don't take people's inventory all the time. We just don't have to share it with you or everybody else. But we do take inventory. If you want what we have and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, there's an assessment that's being kind of evaluated there. How many people remember the first couple looking around and kind of thought, what a bunch of losers? Welcome, right? Because we don't understand what we're dealing with, right? Or when you're in a meeting, you think it's about sharing about your day. Nothing wrong with that, but that's not the purpose of a meeting. Am I making any friends yet? So why is it so important? Why is the traditions put together the way they are? Why is the book outlined the way it is? And why is our kind of I am responsible statement kind of talking about, right? And so if you're in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, just kind of picture this, and you probably, not that you've ever been to a meeting where they never carry the message or ever talk about alcoholism or the steps, I know that. But if you just went to a meeting where it was page 417, and you were an alcoholic, and you sat there and you listened to everybody's experience that acceptance was the answer to all your problems, and you're sitting there and kind of listen, the intellect, it was feeding the ego, you think, okay, you'd leave that meeting thinking that you had the solution to all your life problems. So what didn't happen in that meeting was the sharing of the experience, strength, and hope, the identification part, right? What's the identification part? The problems that created see, a lot of people talk about their consequences and call that alcoholism, right? Or that's what makes me an alcoholic, or all these consequences. So then you get a guy like me sitting and listening to all these consequences. I had 15 impaired. Well, you should have tried some methamphetamine. I don't know what. I've never had an impaired, right? So I'm sitting there, so far so good. But have I ever drove impaired? All the time. All the time. Like when I got sober, I had to learn how to re-drive again, because I always compensate for the lines going this way or that way, right? So the identification part's the most important thing. So in working with others, they talk about certain things here. They talk about, if you kind of look at page 89, they talk about nothing will ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with another alcoholic. If you've ever sponsored anybody, you know it's intense. So you don't have the same perspective your sponsor has about you that you have about your sponsor. It's two different experience, right? You don't have the same perspective of you that everybody around you has. You don't have the same story. You're not telling the same story that everybody knows you is telling, right? There's two different stories. And what we try to do is try to get for us to see the story of what the problem is. And so what's the story? The story of alcoholism and how we have recovered. Does that kind of make sense? So if I'm talking about all the behaviors, my old behaviors, and how I'm working on this and I'm working on that, have I covered alcoholism? Talk about robbing, stealing, lying, cheating, car wrecks, lost jobs, failed marriage. Am I talking about alcoholism? So what we see is that's the human condition. And would everybody kind of qualify if that was alcoholism? Everybody would qualify, because nobody's exempt from the human condition. So what makes me alcoholic? That would be the first point. Anybody been to a meeting where there's new people? Or anybody, when you're here new and they always bring up step one? It's amazing how many people never talk about step one. They talk about the consequences, but that's not step one. Well, what's step one? Well, if you kind of go to page 44, and it's the same process that they talk about in working with others. So the first point is to get identification, right? And what's the identification? So on page 44, they talk about, in the preceding chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism. We hope we've made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. Now, why is that important? I'll get to there shortly. I think it says something like that, right? And there's only two questions. If, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you're probably alcoholic. How many symptoms did they talk about there? 2. Or they talked about 2 symptoms, but if you listen in meetings, you'll hear 3 symptoms or my isms. So it gets very convoluted, because you got treatment center ideas, you got this, you got a lot of different ideas, but it's not really based on anything. In the doctor's opinion, he witnessed that these people who recovered, their ideas were grounded in something other than themselves, right? And they also talk about here, if a mere code of morals or better philosophy in life were sufficient, many of us would have recovered long ago. So what does that translate to? That means I heard something really good in one meeting, and I'm sharing it in another meeting. I know none of you have ever done that. I'll take 24, I'll pass it around. Unless it's a case of beer, what are you passing around, right? So we say things that sounds good in the newcomers there. Yeah, I'll take 24 and I'll pass it. So right away we gave them the understanding that right away they could be their own solution if they have this illness. Second, don't drink no matter what. Okay. So I'm again given the impression that I could stay sober under any and all conditions. Anybody ever hear these things or just me? So I'm new listening to this stuff. I go, okay. So don't drink no matter what. Okay, I can do that. We stay sober under any and all conditions. Okay, I'll try that again. Because my mind don't tell me I haven't been able to do that. My mind tells me I'm able to do that, right? Meeting makers make it. You ever hear this stuff? So when we challenge these ideas, and that's why it's really good that when you join a home group to be a part of the business meetings, right? And you talk about your primary purpose, you see the message the group's carrying, you get into being inclusive, but the main idea is that you have strong speakers to carry this message, right? And a part of our job, what we spend a lot of time doing is trying to comfort people. You know what our first job is? To disturb them. I'm good at my job. I'm really good at what I do. So people say, so right away, anybody's brain started kicking in a bit? Nobody's brain kicked in? No one's even listening. As soon as you introduce, I stopped listening a while ago. I thought I was going to be agreeing with everything you said. You're supposed to be appeasing instead of challenging. And that's what a workshop's about, isn't it? It's challenging. How can I do things better? How could it be of service? Because it's not like a job where I go get another job. We're talking people's lives are at stake. Maybe your very own. But if you're not alcoholic, then it doesn't matter what you do. Right? But if you're alcoholic and your very life depends on getting the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, not only the experience of those that went before me to obtain a daily reprieve, when it's life and death, it's a little different. And when you're dying of alcoholism in the fellowship of AA, and you're the only one that don't know it, it gets kind of weird. So what they talk about in the preceding chapters, that means as part of my job to carry this message when I'm working with new people is, yes, I've gone through the chapter working with others. That means it's my job to find people who are suffering from this illness that don't know they're suffering from this illness. And it's also, we get this idea, I need to ask their permission to start working with them, right? If they're in a meeting, they've given consent, right? And the guys who saved my life were the guys that when I seen them, went, oh my God, here they come. Oh, right? Because they were carrying a lot different messages than me and the other new people I was were carrying, right? So why is the importance of this? Well, the first time I got introduced to AA was in 1978. I was 16, and just prior to that, I was thinking of offing my life if this is the rest, how my life looked and how I had to spend the rest of it. Then I met this man who was my dad, who was a member of AA for 4 years at that time. And when I talked to him on the phone on my 16th birthday, he used certain terminology. I didn't understand any of it. Hi, I'm a member of AA, didn't understand that. I'm sober, okay, didn't understand. I'm making amends, didn't know. Right, but all I seen was there was a profound change in his life from what I heard of him to who he was. And I seen that change. For him, his life was profound change, considering, without getting into his story. But he got his experience through the church, through a religious experience in the sanitarium by a member who was 12-stepped him. So he got this sudden flash of light, and he maintained his sobriety through the church and through the fellowship of AA, but he had no idea about the message of AA, right? And so when he shared his message, it was about his relationship with Jesus Christ, and he would think that that the backlash he would get was because he was right. Right? I must be right. See, I'm being persecuted, and he'd cause a confliction. So that approach would create separation. Is that an inclusive or exclusive? Or very limited group of people? And so what happens is I always tried to have his experience. Right? And so in how it works, I said, how may you find him now? So I thought step 2 meant my quest for finding God. Anybody here? How many people stopped reading the book and thought, okay, I'm on my quest to find God? And as new people, that's what we're hearing. May you find him now, okay? Where you go? I'm looking for God, right? Inspirational books, all this stuff. I stopped reading this, or I'm not even reading this. I'm going with my ideas to go find this thing. So I spent 11 years in and out of the fellowship. And every time I came back, right, there was sufficient enough reasons to come back that the people who were trying to help me didn't know either. How do I know that? Because of the message they were carrying. They get me into 12 and 12. They got me into other methods. And I tried to do those methods. I went to the Nazarene, Baptist, Pentecostal, Evangelical. I went to all these places, and I made a good start. But something would happen. And then I'd come back to AA, and people would say, how many people have heard this? I guess you just don't want it. I guess you haven't hit bottom yet. Anybody hear these things? Right? Or we put them in the middle and we do shame-based therapy for half an hour. The whole meeting's directed right at that new person coming back. And you hear people say, well, if I ever went out, I'd never come back. Where are you going to go? McDonald's? I mean, like we're designed for relapses. So the message gives the impression that based on what I'm hearing, I should be able to apply it to my life and stay sober. And the reason I'm not staying sober is because of some external condition or something that I'm unable to bring about. I haven't learned my lesson yet. I haven't surrendered. I haven't got acceptance. Anybody make sense? So a guy like me or alcoholics like me that the book talks about make a good start. Right? So my last relapse, I spent 360 meetings in 90 days. I was in 4 12 and 12 studies. And I remember it was April 6th, and I talked about what a great job I was keeping myself sober. How life was fantastic this time. I mean it. And this time it's coming up to 11 years of in and out. I, at that stage, had no idea what the problem was in regards to alcoholism or the problem I was dealing with or the solution being offered or even the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, as weird as it may sound. We're talking about back in 89 and beforehand. I was introduced to the 12 and 12 and the Velco and all these different methods. So what happened is April 8th was a Saturday and I got a 3-month chip again, but this time, if I did a self-analysis, see, we get the idea, as long as I don't think about it, I'm all right. The obsession is left. Right? I'm okay now. I said to myself, self, what do you think? Well, the obsession is left. I must be okay. What I just said is I don't understand alcoholism because I would be under that illusion that if I'm not thinking about it and I don't want to do it, then I must be okay. But what I didn't realize is that is the condition of alcoholism. So what happened was there was this guy named George, and he couldn't stay sober. The guy had a big red nose, veins on it, his shakes, psoriasis, and I looked at him, I thought, oh my God, if I ever got like that, right? He was the only guy left to feel good about in AA. I look at him and thought, oh my God, if I ever get that bad, I'm vomiting green bile, right? Unemployable, cutting my own hair. I got a bit of jaundice happening. But if I ever get that bad, the inability to see me as I was, right? And that's another thing the doctor talked about in Full Flight from Reality and Downright Mental Defectives, the inability to see ourselves as we are, right? Because we've conditioned ourselves to live in this unbearable situation because we can't change it. So our situation changes our lives because we can't change our lives. Does that kind of make sense? Right? So the conditions changed my life. That means my life is changed to meet my conditions because I can't change my condition to meet means alcoholism takes over. Where, I'm going to go to work, but it seems like another drink's important. I'm not gonna. And I keep on finding myself drinking again. Anybody, am I in the right room? Right? Solemn oath to swear off forever. So getting back to So George got 12-stepped. So there was these group of guys that would go through the fellowship, and they would do the condition of the book. They would look for people who were dying of alcoholism in AA. And what they would start doing is working with you without your permission, right? And so the one guy was Machine Gun Jerry. The other guy was Steve Rick, and another guy, I forget his name right now. But they would get you into a home group. They would get, hey, you want to come into a home? So they'd bring you into the home, and they'd take you through a process, and they would say, in turn, you need to go work with other people. Then they'd get you into the traditions. Then they'd get you into other books like Sermon on the Mount or the history of it. They'd get you into other literature after you've gone through this process. So George, having gone through this process, he got lit up from the inside out. Same experience that Bill had, right? Once somebody took him through the process. See, remember Bill, the third time, he was in treatment 2 other times previous to that. That's where the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous started, is when the doctor witnessed this change that happened in his life, because the doctor knew him as the hopeless type. What that translates into, there's no helping him. He's beyond human aid. We've already worked with him. We've tried everything. He doesn't really want it. Does that sound familiar? Anybody look at people in meetings and think that? Doesn't really want it. Hasn't hit bottom yet. Need to do some more research. Those are statements done by people, in the book calls it ignorance. I wouldn't use that word, right? It's people that don't understand alcoholism, right? So George, they told George to go find the sickest guy he knew. He wasn't in town, so he started working with me. And he never asked my permission. He started 12-stepping me. And how he started 12-stepping me was making me aware of maybe my understanding of things wasn't quite as things are. He started challenging my thinking. He walked out, hey, Tony, how you doing? I'm fantastic. The promises are coming true. This is Brenda, right? Got a new watch, got a new car. Life's fantastic. I'm getting it all back, right? Come on, anybody? So George would say, oh, that was a great talk. I said, yeah. He says, what's an alcoholic? And I went into this big spiel, and he says, none of that makes you an alcoholic. It makes you an a-hole, but it doesn't make you. And he walked away. Now, George, without realizing it, is starting to sponsor me. He's getting in my head. That's the first sign of sponsorship, is the person that gets in here, which is good, because now you're leaving a meeting thinking about somebody else other than yourself, which is a change, right? There's a change coming, and you have no... That's why we're the only people excited for you. We're more excited for you than you are. That's why we tell, can you participate in the saving of your own life? Well, I don't know, I'm kind of busy. It's like, come on, right? And the fellowship starts getting a hold of you, right? You know what I mean? There's just something here, and it's like the scene of this movie where he's sitting there and he just gets out of the hole again, and he's kind of given a big bowl of rice. Right, and he kind of can't eat it because his stomach is shrunk, but if he doesn't eat it, he's going to end up back in the hole again. But all his buddies see that he's in trouble, so everyone goes by and takes a spoonful of rice. They don't take the whole plate, they just take enough. What's left is a manageable enough for him to consume. And that's like AA. Without realizing it, there's something at work here. Right? And when something inside, when we pray for that direction in 11, how could I be of service? That's our job. How can I be of maximum service to God and the people, to fit myself? Right? We have this intuition that something at work in our lives, right? What does that mean? So it kind of means, remember, how many people has read Bill's story here? So remember the second time in treatment, not the first time, because remember he left treatment feeling fantastic? Who's the only one that don't know he's going to relapse? Him. And that's 90% of the fellowship. They're the only ones that don't know that relapse is inevitable, because we're telling them they're going to be okay, which is a lie. You're not going to be okay, because if you're afflicted with this illness, you're in deep shit. Well, you'll be okay. And we think, yeah, I'm going to be okay. like we're not right? So what he did without realizing it was, I believe that earnestness that came from within, no words could tell the loneliness and despair. Alcohol was my master. What I wouldn't give to right, to fix things, to make things right. Remember he was talking with his wife? I believe that sent a telegram to the universe, right? The power greater than God, whatever you want to call it, czars of the heaven, whatever, and put in motion trains of circumstances where Ebby called Bill. Bill didn't call Ebby. You notice that? Bill was sitting there dying of alcoholism, right? Ebby called Bill, and then he went and sat with Bill while he was drinking. Most people say, call me when you're sober. Looks like never. Right? So, right? And so he's sitting there talking to Bill, and what he talked about to Bill was Bill knew the problems of alcoholism because he talked to the doctor. So he identified that the person who was there to share his experience, strength, and hope had the same problem he had. But he said what that did was revise his idea of miracles right then and there. Because what he talked about, what sat across from the table from me was a miracle. My ideas of miracles were revised. This guy was internally rearranged, which is a part of our message. Carry this message. And sometimes it's not verbally. It's just a demonstration of these things. So when we're doing our nines, when we're in our workplaces, when we're in our meetings, we're an example of something that's remarkable that's happened in our lives. So when Ebby sat there and he seen that when he talked to him, he talked about this course of action that he took. And he made it presentable in such a way that Bill seen that it was obtainable. If he just did what he did, he would get what he got. Like that's how simple this message is. Can you identify with the problem, right? The physical allergy, the mind, the mental kind of, not the obsession, right? The malady that centers in the mind that places us beyond human aid. An unexplainable event that we seem to have that is incapable of keeping us sober. So when they talked about that on page 42, they talked about how two members of Alcoholics Anonymous came and they grinned. And what they did was qualify him before giving him a solution. What most of us try to do is give the solution while qualifying. First we qualify, then we offer the solution. Because not everybody needs to do the solution on the level the same as an alcoholic does. So what makes a person in need of doing this is the person who has an alcoholic mind. The person who has it doesn't know they have it, but after talking to them for a couple of minutes, you'll know right away whether they have an alcoholic mind. Now, if you did a survey, if we did a little survey of what makes a person have an alcoholic mind, how many people would say a behavior? This behavior, that behavior. I do this because I'm alcoholic. I do that because I'm alcoholic. You ever hear this thing? Right? Oh, I was alcoholic before I drank. I'm so alcoholic. You're alcoholic before you drink. How did you know? Oh, my behaviors. Gets confusing, right? So if you look at the book on page 22, 23, and it's the same qualification in working with others. It's the exact same process. And they talk about the drinking game, right? And if he's alcoholic, he'll match your mental inconsistencies. What do they mean by the mental inconsistencies? Well, on page 22, They go from the physical allergy part. Anybody need not explain how many people get thirstier here when they drink? Everybody understands that. And there's a new thing going through the fellowship. Relapse isn't a part of my story. Well, then you don't got one. Because that's the story of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not, and we change things. Oh, no, it means since you started coming to recovery. I haven't relapsed since I've been AA. Like, relapse is... They say relapse isn't a part of recovery. Yes, it is. It's the first step in recovery. It's step one. Right? Because if I can't identify with the inability to stay sober, then why would I need to do the rest of the work? If I can keep myself sober, then I'll go to meetings and talk about my solution. There's nothing wrong with that. The only requirement for membership is there to stop drinking. So on page 22, they talk about if we never took the drink, we'd never set the terrible cycle in motion. We all agree on that, right? I wouldn't trigger the allergy, right? And then I won't have consequences because if I can't control the amounts I drink, is there always going to be consequences? So we see what causes the consequences is my inability to control how much I drink. Yes? So what would be more important to talk about the meeting? The physical allergy part, that the inability to control my drinking? Or the consequences? What? The inability to control my drinking. So how many people, what do you mean by that? Well, I get thirstier. I know I should pay the rent. I know I should pay the child support. I know, but something takes over and I forget about all that stuff and nothing more important than a drink. My God, me too. Me too. I was just going to have one, and I promised everybody I was going to behave myself, and then I came to with the neighbor's wife, and I don't know how I got there. And anybody? Yeah, you get, yeah, me too. What? I get thirstier when I drink, right? I get thirstier when I drink. They call that phenomenon of craving that makes me different than other people. Oh, wow. That's all the way through the book. So then you go, yeah, but if I never took a drink, all those things wouldn't happen. So, that's where that idea from. Just don't take the first one, you'll be okay. The book says on page 23, why you're not okay is because we have a condition that centers in the mind. And this condition is what places us beyond human aid. Not everybody, us. So it's a collective experience. The allergy is a singular or collective. You can participate, it's collective, right? So the second symptom that they're talking about here is it singular or collective? Collective, that's what they all agreed on. So when they put this together, they all agreed on the experience they had in regards to the problem, the solution, and the course of action they took. They all agreed on it, right? So when they talk about this thing, they talk about these observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink. Therefore, and setting the terrible cycle in motion. Therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind. And they go, because they didn't read on. They think, all my behaviors. That's not what we're talking. There's two conditions we're talking about here. The doctor talked about all the way through this book. They talk about two different conditions. One is the human condition, and one is the alcoholic condition. And as long as the alcoholic condition is present, I'll never be able to develop the human condition. Right? So that they talk about. So when you recover from alcoholism, are you still dealing with alcoholism? No. I've recovered from that part. Now I'm left with the human condition that I apply these spiritual principles to that give me a daily reprieve. Right? So the problem's been removed. What problem? This condition of the mind. Do I still have the allergy? 100%. As long as I don't put alcohol into it, I won't trigger the allergy. So the most important part is as long as this condition of the mind stays altered, changed, what they call a psychic change or spiritual experience, I'll never have to worry about drinking again. But I'm left with is the human condition. So from page 44 on, they talk about the human condition. Right? And page 60 on, they talk about the alcoholic as an extreme example of the human condition. Right? Though we don't usually think so. So the spiritual malady is an association with the human condition, not alcoholism. Whoa, just got quiet there. Right? They said, because if it was a part of alcoholism, they would have mentioned it beforehand, right? They haven't. They mention the spiritual principles as a solution to our problem, not the problem. Right? So they talk about in the fourth step is the manifestation of the things that caused our failure as human beings. But the alcoholic is an extreme. These things are poison. They kill us. Why? Because we return to drinking. The insanity returns, we return to drinking. When harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit, and the insanity returns. Not the behavior, the insanity returns. And I'm without defense. I take the drink, wondering how this happened again. Remember the jaywalker? Right? How about Jim? How about Fred? How about how about Bill? One of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. He knew he could not take so much as one drink. He was so good at it, they put him in treatment for the third time. But what was different the third time, he went through a course of action, and he had learned a spiritual recipe that he put into practice. When he left the treatment center, he talked about resentments and depression nearly drove him to drink again. But what saved the day is the carrying of this message, yes? Not going home writing about yourself or going to 15 minutes and, 15 meetings and talking about acceptance and all the problems you have in association with it, right? It's like when people talk about forgiveness and they mention everybody they're forgiving. right? You get that one on the way home, right? It's kind of like, and the bedevilments talk about, we're a prey to misery. Prey, Prey. And we couldn't control our emotional natures. A lot of people think this is about controlling these things. That's what we do here. And we're working on our behaviors. We're working on these issues. That's not what this is about at all. It's about an experience that has me free of all those things. But unless you experience it, you can't be free of these things. Right? Bill talked about his friend promised when these things were done, he would have the elements of way of living that answered all his problems. If you've been through the fourth step in the big book, the fourth step is the foundation for step 11. You learn how to master resentment. You learn how to outgrow fear. You learn how to bring your conduct into alignment where it doesn't cause you guilt, shame, and remorse and hurt to other people. You learn to curb how you approach life where you're not creating harm anymore. And that's derivative of your spiritual condition. So what we offer is a spiritual solution. The promises talk about this change. We'll suddenly realize this power of God is creating this change. The psychic change, the spiritual experience in the back of the book. We've undergone a profound alteration to life. Usually the people around us will be more aware of this change than we are. If you're the first one aware of the change, FYI, you haven't changed. Anybody, I've changed so much. You got 20? No, we go around convincing how much we changed. This time, everybody around you will know. So it's kind of weird, but it's full loop, meaning if I understand these things, then my job as a sponsor, my job carrying this message is make sure all these things are in place. What? Business meetings, home groups, service, all levels of service, the basket that goes around, right? Central office, New York, literature, that all these things are available for the person coming through that door because they're coming. Just as somebody was responsible to make sure these seats were here for when we got here, it's our job to make sure these seats are here for when someone else gets here. Not only that this message gets carried, it's our responsibility to carry this message. It's not the new person's responsibility. It's not the non-alcoholic. It's not the person who hasn't gone through it. It's our job, regardless of the pushback we get in meetings. Regardless. Form more groups that are like-minded. Why? Because when a person comes in here and they get this message, something profound will happen to them. So George, full circle, George started working with me without my knowledge or permission. Then he kind of assessed me. So in working with others and carrying this message, they say, find out all you can about the person. That means you have to talk to them. You're not starting off as an evangelical. Remember, Tradition 3 is also to save the newcomer from us. The only requirement for members is desire to stop drinking, right? You don't tackle them. That one's mine, but you kind of, I got an eye on that one. You got that one, I got that one. Here's my number. Can we talk? How you doing? Blah, blah, blah. And curb the conversation to how we got here. Working with others is a phenomenal chapter. So George, after my profound... I told him my 11 years of profound knowledge and experience on something that I had, talk at great lengths of all the stuff regurgitated from meetings I heard from other meetings, and this usually, I'll take 24, I'll pass it on, acceptance, surrender, do a fantastic talk. I think they're adjusting the lights, the angels are singing, and oh my God, I got this, and go home and kick the cat through the screen door. But just nuts. 2 minutes after the meeting, spirituality kind of went south. Anybody? So George says, Tony, you've been around a long time. I said, yeah, I have. Yeah, I have. And he says, we're starting a new step group. He says, we'd really like it if you can come and help us out. I bet you would. Right? Because I want this. I want this. Without getting into it, I want this because I'm a danger to me and everybody around me. I drank myself out of a province, right? I had the sergeant of the Toronto division come and visit me and explain things to me in such a way you don't need to explain it twice. And I thought, yeah, I'm out of here. So I ended up in Vancouver. So George, I went to his house and thinking I was going to help him. I remember asking Chuck. Chuck was teaching me about the traditions and how to conduct myself in meetings and stuff like that. And the fellowship would get a hold of me, and they're trying to find me a job. They said, okay, Tony, you be the greeter. I think you're sober enough to be a greeter. And I'd be the greeter for like 3 handshakes. Say, okay, maybe just stick with the chairs because I don't like the way you shook my hand, man. You got a problem? And that's not a good way to greet people coming into a meeting, right? So maybe you set up chairs, right? So, okay, I'll try that. So I'd do chairs and coffee and stuff like that. So I'm going to George's house, and I remember going there, and this is kind of weird, but this is the first house I've been invited to. I've been living in Vancouver for a while. I lived in AA. My cheese and crackers weren't even on the same plate. I'm way out there, right? My home group used to go for coffee, and I didn't know that. They invited me once, don't invite him again. I remember a newcomer saying, hey, we're going for coffee. I was going to that meeting a year and a half. I didn't stay sober, a year and a half. And he says, we go every week. You want to come? I guess no one told him the memo. No, don't invite that one, right? And I said, I've been coming here a year and a half. He said, so I went, got barred, but anyways, I decided. So I go to this house, and I knock on the door, and Judy answered. And Judy is a beautiful one. She's an Al-Anon. Right, beautiful woman, and they used to have a group run at the same time as the group that I've had conflicts in with a lot of different people, the Wellington Heights meeting, and she would be over, give you the kind of mental health that some of us deal with, not all of us. So they'd have an Allen on me. So I'm getting into a conflict with a couple guys, I think over a woman or money or something. And she comes over, she says, we're having a meeting over there. Can you guys keep it down? I said, what kind of meeting? She says, Al-Anon. I said, what's that? She goes, all you 3 knew? I said, yeah. She says, I don't got time to explain it 3 times, right? So she went back into the meeting. But what happened is I found out they were there because of us. So I used to go by there all the time before I went through this process and you're welcome. I'm like, what a dick. And they're just scoring at me. And when people scoring at me, I think it was funny. I got you, right? I got you, right? And I'd say, you're welcome. Anyway, so when Judy answered the door, her eyes were huge. Oh my God, you know the address? It's like, hey, you're welcome. No, just so. But she knew her husband's life depended on this. And what they did is they invited me in their home with this 12 and 12. I'm cutting my own hair. My glasses are busted. They have the old knob on them, that the plastic thing, because I didn't know you could buy an arm for the glasses. And they invite me in their home. And what he did was, for the first time in 11 years, I got 12 stepped into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. First time in 11 years. So they sat me down and they started taking me through this. And what they say is, what did you hear me saying? They didn't ask me what I thought. Right? And then I'd say, this is what I heard. And they said, no, that's not what we mean. And they said, do you understand this? I said, no, I don't understand this. And then they would explain it in such a way that made sense to me. Like the allergy, it didn't make no sense to me whatsoever. They explained it as a thirst. Do you get thirsty? Yeah. When I drink. Are you more concerned with the next drink before the first? Yeah. And then as I went through this, it was explained to me for the first time based on page 23 here, where they talk about once this malady has a real hold, they're a baffled lot. It's the first time in 11 years I've ever heard the condition that centers in the mind as a malady. A condition that we can't explain, but this is what it looks like for those that have it. The allergy, can't really explain it, but this is what it looks like. So we use the terminology allergy as an abnormal reaction. Well, what's normal? You get into all that. So they got together and said, this is the terminology we want to use in order to explain this, that those who are afflicted with it will understand it at once. Right? And it will make good sense. So they explain this thing as a phenomena of craving. Unexplainable event, but for those who have it, this is what it looks like. The second symptom in alcoholism, everybody explains it as the obsession. Nowhere in the big book do they explain it that way. They explain it here as a malady that centers in the mind. Just like the allergy, they start using terminology to build on it. These allergic types, the phenomenon of craving, right? This here, they talk about it as if you go to page 37, they talk about this condition as the guy who put an ounce of whiskey in the milk. And they all agreed on the explanation of this. So when you're talking about step one, you're talking about an unexplainable event for those who are afflicted with it. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't ask you if it makes sense. It means, are you afflicted with it? Step one doesn't take work. It takes understanding. I'm working on step one. We don't work on step one. We're given information. I concur that I'm afflicted with this illness. This illness has me. I don't have it. Makes sense. So they talk about here, you may think, they talk about whatever the precise definition of the word may be, right? We call this plain insanity. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? This is the best explanation of the malady as explained as the main problem of the alcoholic on page 23 is, you may think this is an extreme case. To us is not far-fetched. For this kind of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us. Collective or singular? Collective. So when you start talking about these, I relapsed here. When did you relapse? Well, the first time I said I wasn't going to drink again. When was that? I was 15. I won't get into that story, but it was sufficient. I'm never drinking again. Standing on this 18th story of a balcony thinking about jumping on a 3-day run, streets of Toronto, right, doing what I was doing. I'm thinking if I got to live the rest of my life like this, I'm never doing it again, coming to AA, recreating my life. And then, I'm in a choir looking at Baptists, looking at a Bible college, and my life's taken off, fantastic, going to college, Conestoga College, I'm learning construction. Things are fantastic, right? See her, she sees me. That's God-inspired moment. Anybody been there? Yeah, come on. There now. No, just so we're singing and like Mr. Bean in the choir, and he asked me, Tony, I'm never relapsed. I went down. They drove me from Ontario down to New York to look at a college I was going to go to. I'm getting this thing. Life's fantastic. Never been better. I've never experienced a better place in my life than where I was. She phoned and she was drinking, and my buddy says she wants to talk to me. As soon as I heard her voice, anybody? There was something different. There was magic in those voices, and I knew it was drink without realizing it. And I went from the choir on Sunday to sitting in an abandoned car in a field drinking. Wednesday, I'm drinking another 26er. She's huffing glue, and I'm wondering how she's gonna get her to meet my mom. Anyway, girl of my dreams. Anyway, they took her away. Anyway, so they talked about, and that was one episode, and that goes with the story, like I said earlier, on page 42, where the members talked about the mental inconsistencies. That's what they talk about, this malady, this phenomena. So they talk about the characteristic of every single one of us. We have sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences. So now we call the I wanted to drink. You wanted to drink. You ever hear that terminology? No, the decision was made for you until you can see it's going to happen again. So the step one promise is I'm going to drink again. Because if I could stay sober in step one, what I need to do step two? We've gone quiet here. Step one, if I understand it, propels me to step two. Is there any exceptions? Yes, the doctor talked about, right? There's been exceptions to your cases since the beginning of time. To me, these are phenomena, but they appear to be, and then he gets into this psychic change. Then he goes on and says, well, he felt good because of his religious teachings. And then they talked about it doesn't spell the necessary spiritual experience, and his hopes were dropped. Right? That's one of the stories here, because we start using our own thinking. So when you kind of look at step one, is and in the book it says, we ask, what do I need to do? willing to go any lengths. So you hear, we change things. We hear, another couple of minutes here, we hear people say, I'll finish this. We have sometimes reflected more than Jim did upon the consequences, but there was always the curious mental phenomenon that paralleled with our, that ran with our, same reason, I should have my glasses on. Invariably ran some insane, trivial excuse or taking the first drink. So run parallel. So they're talking about here a condition that I can't see, feel, and touch. Right? And when it happens, it's too late, I'm drinking. Anybody here other than me after you're drinking wondering why you're doing drinking? Why am I doing this? Right? That's the baffling feature of alcohol. That's the beginning of step one. That's a relapse. That's what the book describes as step one. So if you have never experienced drinking against your own will, welcome. The only requirement for membership is desire to stop drinking. Most of us have been more than once we've drinking against our own will. Anybody? Solemn oath promises, and the doctor talks about this. This is repeated over and over and over. And unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope of his recovery. That's the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you're like us, we already know you're not staying. I've said that at meetings. People come out after the meeting just pissed at me. What do you mean by that? So it looks like you're looking for a sponsor. I say that in my mind. I got you on the hook, right? Because he's afraid he might be like that. That's been his experience, right? And so he's asking me now, what do I mean by that? And that's what the book talks about. Let him ask you. Our job is to disturb them. But if I'm making you feel good about your situation, are you going to seek another situation other than what makes you feel good? So when it says carry this message, whose responsibility is it? Not everybody's, just the alcoholics. Right? And so we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll disturb you some more. So there's in working with others, we're going to get right into this. To clarify, when the group was looking for a job for me, I wasn't talking about a paying job. I was talking about a job within the fellowship. People would say, "Oh, they get you jobs." And another thing here is they talk about willing to go to any lengths, in any extreme to do so. And so when these guys 12-step me, they kind of qualified me beforehand. And so when I'm working with guys, especially guys who've been in the fellowship, constant relapsers, I ask them certain questions. Are you in the big book study? Who's your sponsor? Are you doing the work that they're asking you to do? Right? Because a part of it is it's our job, without realizing it, is if you've been in and out a while, is to qualify your sponsor, to see if they're qualified to deal with you. Right? Because if you're not alcoholic, then anybody could sponsor you. But if you're alcoholic, you need a certain type of sponsor. Right? It's like this guys I sponsor. I have guys come, hey, can you sponsor me? I said, what's it? He says, well, I'm on meth, or I'm on this or that. I said, well, I can't really. You can come through the big book study, but you need to find a sponsor who has that experience of getting off of methadone or getting off. It's about sharing our experience, strength, and hope, not our opinions, our ideas. Right? If I have no experience with that, like I have sponsors phone me and say, hey, can you help me with this? Can you give me your opinion? I said, no. I'll give you my experience. If I don't have experience with it, I'll find somebody that does. Right? And it's so life-changing. Why I remember going to this group in Queensway Saturday night group in Toronto. My sobriety date was in Pencil. And so I was there like 4 years out of the Army, and anybody coming back, the whole group would just look at me, right? If the people don't know, they don't know. Like, it's a fellowship of men and women. We volunteer, so whatever. They don't know, right? Like, it's one of those things. So they tried to help me as best they could, right? And so they said, hey, Tony, you come set up chairs. So I said, okay. So I showed up this group to set up chairs, and there was an old timer there. I think he was 30 years sober at the time. old guy, right? And then I set up the chairs with him, and it'd be all over the place. He'd come behind me, and he'd put the chairs right on the square. And he says, if you can't do the little things to the best of your ability, how you expect to do the, big things? And I think, well, I won't tell you what I thought, but... And he did this week after. So one day he says, so he started talking. I said, he says, you look like you're thinking. I said, yeah, I got this problem. I told him, well, he says, oh, why don't you do this? I said, okay, I went and did it. I said, oh my God, it made it worse. It was relationship advice. He was a single guy, so he was teaching me how to get single. So right, so I said, so he says, well, try this. And I went and tried and made it worse. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be single any day now, just like you. No, just like, never said that. So then I went to him the third time. I said, how did it work for you? He says, oh, I've never had that problem. So you need to qualify people, right? Like, do they have the same problem that you have? So in working with others, they talk about here, it's a lifeline for me that keeps me connected. It's the recipe that Bill learned, leaving treatment for the third time. That gave him a different experience than the first two previous times. And they talk about here that one of the things that is our responsibility is to teach the newcomer, not the newcomer to teach us. And just because 90% of the people say something different, it's our job to stay the course. Is that kind of, so when it's like being in a classroom, you have one teacher and maybe two people have been through the class. 90% of the people haven't been through the class, so 90% of the people don't know. And so when you hear the 90% of the people share, they'll make more sense than the three people. But when the literature backs up what they're saying, right, and then you kind of see the importance of it, it'll make sense. So how important is this? So on page 90, they talk about wait for the end of a spree, or at least for a lucrative interval, right? And then they talk about here, ask him if he's willing to quit for good, and if he'd go to any extreme to do so. If he says yes, then his attention should be drawn to you as a person who has recovered. You should be described to him as one of a fellowship. You may see, every time, all those 11 years in and out, I thought I was in the program. You do a survey, most people think they're in a program. It would go against our traditions if this was a program. This is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope. And when you reiterate it's a program, you're telling the new people that this is the program. And get in the middle. You ever hear that? Get in the middle. If you're not in the book, you're not in the middle of AA. Alcoholics Anonymous took its name from the big book. It was put together as a collective experience. This is the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous. The whole thing is built on the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the only solution we have to offer. We don't have nothing else. If you're alcoholic looking for a solution, that's the only thing we endorse. This is our program, as outlined in the first portion, not first 164 pages. It's important. The book talks about our programs found in the first portion, not the first 164 pages, right? So little things change, and we kind of change pretty soon, that the fellowship's talking a different language than our literature, right? Oh, let's help everybody out. No, the only requirement for members of desire to stop drinking, and anybody could come to an open meeting. Who shares in a meeting? Those people who are afflicted with alcoholism. And if they're not afflicted with alcoholism and they share in a meeting, you don't Shanghai them in the meeting. You talk to them afterwards about some of our pamphlets, problems other than alcohol. If they're sent here by the courts, you're welcome to be here. We'll sign your paper, right? Do open meetings, right? Meetings are for people who have a history with alcohol. Well, what about these other people? Well, we have other fellowships. Why don't you introduce them to them? We have mental health. So a part of a home group too, if you're a part, is to have information about other groups that are available to specialize in helping those people. Right? Because can you actually kill somebody or cause them a disservice or cause us a disservice by letting them believe they could be members of AA when they don't have a drinking problem? So who's survival? So you have a person who has a different problem than alcohol. You know how many different fellowships there are? Huge. Whose life would depend on getting this? The alcoholic. So when George carried this message to me, it saved everything. So they talk about here when you find your prospect, and then you get page 92. Our job when we talk about step 1 is tell him how baffled you were and how you finally learned you were sick. Give him an account of the struggles you made to stop. Show him the mental twist which leads to the first drink. We suggest we do this as we've done in a chapter on alcoholism. If he's alcoholic, he will understand you at once. He will match your mental inconsistencies with some of his own. If you are satisfied he is a real alcoholic, it looks like we do take people's inventories. If you qualify them, doesn't mean you need to tell them. It means I'll introduce you to a sponsor that can help you talk about your emotional problems all day. You know what I mean? I have a job to take you through a course of action that connects you to something else that you could experience the same change I've experienced. I have a responsibility to introduce you to the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. Right? So they talk about if you're satisfied that he's a real alcoholic, begin to dwell on the hopeless feature of the malady, not the obsession. Why do we like the obsession? Because the obsession doesn't put me beyond human aid. Whoa, I know when I'm obsessing. What puts me beyond human aid is the mental twist that precedes a relapse, the phenomena. See, the mental obsession, I could smash that given good reason. That's a part of step 1. We had to smash the idea that we could control and enjoy our drinking. That's the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. Right? And so I was one of those guys that never thought about drinking before I drank. I had no desire to drink. I had no thought or inkling about drinking. I just found myself drinking. Suddenly, 3 months, got a chip, great talk, things were fantastic. An hour later, I was drinking. Baffled. So when they explained this, the more I understood step 1, the more I understood it's coming again. That's our job. Right? When they told me that the step 1 promise is I'm going to drink again, that gave me a hopeless feeling. If you're feeling good about step 1, you haven't done step 1. So how many people here work with people? 2 people, that's good. So, kind of sorry I even showed up here today. And that's the workshop, is to challenge, like go and create conversation, to challenge, to look at the book, is if you're sticking with your own idea and your own understanding and you're not willing to move past that, then enjoy where you're at. But this is a never evolution of growth and being of service and being of help. So they talk about here this malady. Then you continue to speak of alcoholism as an illness, a fatal malady. They never use the word obsession to describe step 1. Why we do is a lot from the treatment centers. If you're paying me $50,000 to treat me, you better give me a solution I could apply to me to fix me. I want to leave here feeling good about the idea of me fixing me with me. I'm not paying you $50,000 to tell me I'm beyond human aid and then hand me a big book. That's an expensive big book. And see, if you get into the history of this thing, it's the exact same thing that was happening back when Bill was trying to get sober. He went into a treatment facility. Yes? And the doctor talked about his methods worked for most of the people he dealt with. So most of the treatment centers, people are very successful, but they were never successful of the type of alcoholic he was. Treatment centers are not successful with the type of alcoholics they talk about in here. We need a specific solution to a specific problem. So what's my job as a sponsor is to fix people, right? My job is to give you the information to bring you through this process. Well, what makes you say that? Well, I'm glad you asked. It said, continue to speak of alcohol as a fatal malady. Talk about the conditions of the body and mind which accompany it. So that's step one. If you're in a meeting, that's what you're talking about. But what about the newcomer? Right on. I hope there's a couple there. Your job is to disturb them. Right? So they talk about keep your attention focused mainly on your own personal experience, not your ideas, thoughts, and right? Your own experience. Explain that many are doomed who never realize their predicament. The reason you're able to talk about this condition is because you offer a solution. Right? They'll approach you wondering what you're talking about. What do you mean by this condition? What do you mean I'm going to relapse again? The only people that get upset about the idea of the step one promise is usually heavy drinkers. Right? Because the alcoholic needs to know that step one won't keep them sober. That there's a certain type here that need to go through this process. And they talk about step two is the main thing is that he be willing to believe that there is a power greater than himself. If you're taking somebody through this process and they've gone through we agnostics and they're unwilling to believe that there is something greater than themselves, we have nothing to offer them. You could offer them friendship and ask them to continue on. Alcohol needs to beat them back into a state of reasonableness. Right? And if they still think this is a religious thing and still arguing about God, then they haven't been through the first part of the book. They haven't moved past the trappings of their own mind. Because the way this is outlined is by the time you finish we agnostics, we have a way out which we can all agree on. In the spiritual appendix in the back of the book, they talk about all our members. Not some of them, all our members have tapped into an inner resource of strength. So when they talk about this thing, the collective experience is a collective understanding, collective explanation. Not for me, not my conception, not my ideas, my experience. What are we offering? We're offering a course of action that when gone through will enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. What you call that is your business. But the bottom line is that's the only solution we have. And what's the purpose of this book is to get you connected to that power, right? And so if I take somebody through this, they'll have their own experience. But before that experience starts for them, all they can go on is my experience that I've had, that we've had, if you want what we have collectively. So all we have to offer is the same solution. If you're doing it different than what's laid out in here, then you're an irresponsible member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Yeah, I said that. Because somebody's life is in balance. You found a way that works for you, good, keep it to yourself. Or let people know that, hey, I don't do it that way, I do it my own way. Okay. Because if you've gone through this, well, what makes you say, making Frag tell, I love it up here. Sometimes I get the look, right? It's my job. I do a good job disturbing people. So they talk about here on 94, on your first visit, tell them about the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Then they talk about he needs to decide for himself. If he's sincerely interested and wants to see you, ask him again. Ask him to read this book in the interval. Ask him to read this book. There's people been in our fellowship for years who've never read this book. They have one. Ask me, do you have a big book? Yeah. Did you read it? No. Do you have a big book? Yeah. Do you know where it is? No. So here, before you even went to a meeting or they started working with you say, read the book. Have you read the book yet? Are you willing to go through with it? That's all we have to offer. If they're not willing to go through it, then Brenda will sponsor. Yes, she sponsors everybody. Might have to date her for a while, but no, just... I was going to say Fred, but guys get picked on quite a bit here, too. I remember Brenda. She kept me sober for a while. Okay, so anyways. So they talk about... They talk about a process here. And then when they talk about a 92, this malady, and then tell him, let him ask you what you done. And if it's really interested, if you go back, so the same process that they just talked about here, when you go back to page 42, It's the exact same thing, but here it's spread out as a person going through it, right? You're going through the process that they're talking about and working with others. So they talk about here, which is really interesting, on page 40. And this is what's really, I've been doing big book workshops now going over 34 years. I've worked with thousands of people. And what I've seen the most in AA is, including me, is I admit I have a problem, but I've never done step one. A lot of people admit they have a problem, but they haven't done step one. They don't know they've done step one because no one presented them with the idea of step one. And what that looks like is all the way through the book is people who talk about themselves as having a problem until they have the step one experience. And once you have this step one experience, then you understand the malady as presented, and step two starts to make a whole much more sense. Because if you think you can keep yourself sober, do you really need to do this solution? If you can drink, if you cannot drink under any and all conditions, do you really need this solution? If your story is good enough to keep you sober, do you really need this solution? If you could stay sober just by going to meetings, do you really need the solution? So you need to find out whether I really need the solution, right? Or you're just going to wait, relapse, right? Relapse, right? Relapse, right? And you'll think this thing don't work, but you never done this thing to work it, right? So the guy on page 40, Fred, he talks about what most people is that they admit they have a problem, but not a problem that they can't do something about. So anybody ever relapse here? So when you came back, did you let us know what you were going to do different this time? Listen, this week, any newcomer, they're telling us what they're going to do different this time. What's our first obsession? Our first obsession is ourselves. Not only ourselves, is fixing ourselves based on our own thinking. Right? That's the first obsession that needs to be smashed, and that happens with step one in the identification. With this guy here, he talks about, I rather appreciate your ideas of the subtle insanity that precedes the first drink. I like some of you were thinking, that sounds nice. It's not going to happen to me. And then he gets drunk again. Right? He thought relapse was unthinkable. Anybody been there? You hear people, I'm never drinking again. I guess you haven't done step one yet. Because I don't know if I'm ever going to drink again, but so far so good. What I have is a daily reprieve. Right? So far so good. I learned a recipe that I incorporated in my life that allows me to stand here. So my sobriety date could have been easily the date on my tombstone. So what I've been given is an extension, but not only an extension, I've been given an upgrade, not a bad life for wherever I come from. It's like unbelievable. It's been a long time since I've been green bio. I can't trust the cough. But anyways, we'll leave that alone. Some of you got that, eh? So they talk about here, then he goes across the hotel, which is interesting, because when you go through a study, and most people, they'll look at Jim, and they see why he got loaded. Irritable, restless, discontent. Look at all the circumstances. Anybody? We think the book's about analyzing why he got drunk again. Anybody? Let's see. Why did you relapse? Well, let's analyze why you relapsed. Not that you have an illness beyond your control and this condition of the mind that plays you beyond human. Let's look at your behaviors why you relapsed. Well, if it was a behavioral problem, then we could address it like a behavior. Just don't do it. Jeez, I forgot. Right? So here, this talk about here on page 42, as soon as I regained my ability to think, remember, he crossed the threshold of the dining room or something like that, and suddenly he thought a couple highballers. Anybody? Took that, and then it was off and running again. Not a cloud on the horizon. The reason for the two stories is both have the same condition of the mind that places them beyond human aid. The story is secondary. We like the story, because if I can figure it out, then I don't really need to do this. I could depend on me. So they talk about here, as soon as I regained my ability to think, I went carefully over the evening in Washington. Anybody ever ability to think, which is the second problem? Not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatsoever against the first drink. This time, I had not even thought of the consequences at all. I commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. I now remember what my alcoholics friend told me. This is our job in meetings. We talk about this condition. We talk about this thing. That way, when the new person's there arguing with our experience, when they relapse again, because we already know they're relapsing again if they're like us, right? Because they think they could be their own solutions, so they need to be beaten in a state of reasonableness that opens their hearing. Anybody? You ever notice pain and hearing go hand in hand? I like the guys. I'm 2 days sober. I feel so fantastic. Okay, they're not ready. Oh, I got another big book at the round. Anyways, move on, Tony. Okay, so I now remember what my alcoholic friend told me, how they prophesized that if I had an alcoholic mind. What's an alcoholic mind? Mental blank spot, the malady, the insanity, the phenomena, the suddenly. That's an alcoholic mind. And as long as that's present, what's the likelihood of my sobriety? That's why we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. In step 10, they say, by this time, sanity will have returned. It's not by the time you read step 10, it's by the time you're halfway through step 9. Step 10 is this thought brings us to step 10. This thought, because I just finished 7. I read through the whole exercise, and it moves me into step 11, moves me into the daily reprieve and practices necessary for me to develop and grow spiritually to enter a daily reprieve and working with others as I do my 9s, as I clean up the past. Nothing more important than this relationship that I cultivated as an idea in step 3, that through this course of action becomes a reality in 11. So in step 1, you stand alone. Right, step 10, you're not quite there yet because there's a 1 and a 0. You're still alone. Step 11, you're no longer alone. That's why it's the only development step in that process. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying for only knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. How do we understand Him? As an internal access to a power that creates a shift sufficient enough through me to match calamity with serenity. Gives me the strength to move on past the place of me usually not being able to get to. They talk about that over here. So they talk about, back I digress, squirrel. So they talk about here that if I had an alcoholic mind, the time would come when I would drink again. They had said that though I did raise the defense, it would one day give way before some trivial excuse for having a drink. Well, just that happened and more. So what they get down to, he sees that willpower and self-knowledge won't help in those strenuous mental blank spots. Then 2 members of Alcoholics Anonymous came and they qualified him before they moved on. What does qualifying mean? This is what I do with my sponsors. By the time I get to page 44, they ask you to qualify yourself. Right? What does that mean? In the preceding chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism. We've hoped we made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and non-alcoholic. I asked them to go back to their last relapse. Anybody want to see if they've done step 1 yet? Nobody. That's good. So here's what I do with guys. I go, let's go back to your last relapse, the last time you took a drink against your own will. Are you there? And they go, yeah. I said, now think about what you would do different in that situation. What would you do different? What would you suggest? Nobody wants to participate. They feel entrapment. Not pick up. That's a good one. Any other suggestions? Go to a meeting. That's a good one. What else do you hear in meetings? Come on. You're about to relapse. You're keep coming back. Call your sponsor. Think it through. Surrender. Phone some. You hear? Play the tape. Help somebody else. So what you just said there, I have a problem. And given good reason, I'd do it differently this time. What you're actually saying, if you understand this thing, you're back at that moment, there's nothing I could have done different. That this thing had me. And I was without defense against that drink. That's why I relapsed. That's why they get into the next part, and that's our job is once they qualify themselves as being beyond human aid, then they outline the spiritual answer they found. We're telling people 2 days sober, oh, pick God as you understand him. It doesn't say that anywhere. Make your own God up. Oh my God, here we go. Egomaniac making their own God. I made a list, just like Santa Claus. Who knew? Right? So if you get into the understanding of this thing, the basis of step 2, which is interesting. So step 1 is outlaying the problem. Do you identify of having this thing? Do you concur? I concede. Once I concede, step 2 is outlining the solution. Step 2 isn't about your relationship with God. That's step 12. Step 2 is the solution we found in step 1. Step 2 is the experience that I obtained by doing 3 to 12. Page 42. They talk about 2 members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me. They grinned, which I didn't like so much. And they asked me if I thought myself alcoholic. And if I were really licked this time, I had to concede. That's twice they use that word in regards to step 1. Concede to both propositions. They piled on me heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic mentality, an alcoholic mind, such as I had exhibited in Washington, was a hopeless condition. They cited cases out of their own experience by the dozens. This process snuffed out the last flicker of hope of conviction that I can do the job myself. Remember before, a couple pages earlier, he thought relapse was unthinkable. That's what most people think, and because they have a problem. Then we tell them all this stuff to do to keep themselves sober, and they believe they can do it. And then they relapse, and then we look at them thinking, what's your problem? And we're not the ones carrying this message. We put the state of our fellowship and the state of what's happening within it on a new person, where it's our responsibility. Who's looking after the phones? Who's looking after the 12th step calls? Who's going to the meeting half an hour before it shows up for the new person? Who's staying after to clean up? Interesting, right? So they talk about here, in Washington, it was a hopeless condition. They cited, this process, then they outlined the spiritual answer and program of action. So what step were they talking to him about? 2. When Ebby was sitting with Bill, what step was Ebby talking to Bill about? 2. He was talking about the course of action he did to have this experience. So Ebby and these guys are talking from a place of step 12, where I'm talking today is place of step 12, right? But I'm talking to the newcomer about step 2 and what got me to step 12, right? So it was a course of action. So when I'm asked to speak about step 2 in a meeting, I'm talking about the course of action as outlined in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that allowed me to have a connection with something greater than me, that did for me that I couldn't do for myself, is create a change sufficient enough for me to recover. And that's the story of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the miracle that has me standing here 34 years later. So I've been in AA 45 years, but I've been sober as the result of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous outlined in this book that a member took me through, because that was their only responsibility, is to take them through this process for them to have their own experience. And in turn, I've been doing the same thing. And most people who've been through this get lit up from the inside out. You can't contain this thing. It's something that's absolutely beyond explanation. It's a phenomenon. These people who were doomed, seem so beyond human aid, are now, everybody around them is experiencing the promises. How remarkable is that? When the people around you start experiencing something beyond their comprehension of what happened to you, it's like, wow, not the same person. So what's the derivative of that? Me applying me to me, or I suddenly realize that I'm experiencing something that I would never have been able to experience on my own. What I'm experiencing is the story of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? So what's my job as a responsible member who's been through this is to carry this message. So speaking at meetings about step 1, I'm talking about the symptoms of alcoholism and in my life. As the book, step 2 is the solution that Alcoholics Anonymous has to offer to my problem, not my relationship with God. Step 3 is a decision to carry through the rest of the work. The idea in step 3 is the fulfillment in step 11. Step 3 is an idea that if I'm willing to do the rest of the work, I could have this experience. If I could have the experience in step 3, would I do the rest of the steps? Right? So step 3 is the idea to move through with this, as discussed in step 2 is the solution to step 1. Right? And what's the solution? Is a psychic change or spiritual experience as the result of this course of action. The result. So the confirmation of step 2 is step 12. Yeah? No? Confirmation of step 3 is step 11. So 4 is to find out the things within inside of me that have been blocking me off from this power source that's available to me in step 2 that they talked about in the book. Lack of power is my dilemma. Well, where and how was I to find this power? Well, that's what this book is about. So my job is just to get you through this book to have your own connection and your own experience where nothing further needs to be explained. Because beforehand, everything needs to be explained. Once I experience this, nothing needs to be explained. It's an experience. And that's what we need to get back to, sharing our experience, strength, and hope. And if you haven't been through this, guess what? You can't share it, can you? And the likelihood, if you're alcoholic, you're not staying long enough anyways to worry about it. You could do it when you come back. Don't invite that guy back again. Thanks for having me out, Renee. But it saved my life, right? So when I look at step 5, I'm talking to other people about this thing, and I'm starting to forge my relationship with this power. I'm starting to have my own experience through 4 and 5. I seal the deal. 6 is the stuff that I talked about in 4, the resentments, the fears, the harms that I still carry as an abscess on my spirit, right? 7 is the whole willingness to confirm my decision in 3. 8 is a list that I obtained through 4. 9 is going out to make amends, to be an example of what Alcoholics Anonymous do for people like me, to fit myself, to be of maximum service to God and the people around me, to start allowing other people to heal. What a gift, to allow other people to start healing from my indiscretions with them, family, friends, and people. Right? Anybody remember all the scorn and the resentments that they carry and the hurt? To be able to go there on a spiritual plane or a spiritual example to allow them to start healing. What a gift that is. And the only way I could do that is by doing 11. And the only way I could really do my 9s and face all those things if I'm working with other people. Where am I? Where am I being of service? So at 11, when I retire at night, was I thinking about myself all day? Was I considering what I could contribute to life? What did I do for other people and expect nothing in return? How was I of service? That single mom or single dad that's not making it too well, was I able to leave a basket without taking putting it on Facebook? Right? And was I able to take that 12-step call? Was I able to do some of those jobs that nobody wants to do because nobody sees them doing it? Was I willing to go to that business meeting? How responsible of a member of Alcoholics Anonymous I am? How much of an example am I setting? How long am I going to be here for? Is the level of peace, happiness, and contentment I'm experiencing is everything I hope for, or is there more to this? Am I doing the full meal deal, or am I just doing enough just to stand myself and maybe some of the people around me? Come on, anybody? And then every meeting you get talk about how wonderful you are, right? Right, our first obsession. Am I still in stage 1 recovery, where it's all about me? Or am I stage 2 recovery, where I'm of service to something other than me? My first thought is in me. Or when I wake up in the morning and say, okay, what we could do for the world around me. How could I be of service? How could I be a worker amongst workers? How could I be a brother, a son, friend? How could I be that person that might make a difference in somebody's life that don't know that they're looking for? Can I take that call in meditation? So what does that kind of mean? Is if I'm trusting and relying on something else, where does that start taking place? In my experience, it started in 4. When I started having a shift from the resentments and attachment and bondages, when I started applying those prayers that didn't make any sense, I started having a shift, right? And where it really started to happen was in my 5. 5, it removed enough self out of the way where I was able to have this intuitiveness that's something from within. And it's hard to explain, but I understand it when it talks to me. It says in a couple of words, and I understand the whole thing that it's saying, right? And so when I started doing 11s, and I started working with other people right away, like as soon as I went through that big book study with George, we started the BYOB meeting right after. I think I was like 3 months sober, right? We started the Friday night meeting, and then from there went into the, probably it was 24 years ago, I was probably 11 years sober, or 9 years sober, started the big book study workshop and at the Vancouver Alano Club, and it turned into one of the biggest, the biggest big book workshops in Canada. And it all started with a thought of being of service. The thought was, I prayed, God, how could I be of service today? Something said, go start a big book study. I said, nobody likes me. That's why I said to God, God said, it's not about you. So I showed up at this meeting with 4 sponsees, reading the book, took them through it, and they grabbed some other people, and they grabbed some other people, and then we had to split the meeting. So Tuesdays we went from 4 through 12 over a series, and Fridays we went from the introduction to step 3. And like Renee was saying, we were getting like 120 people. And they were showing up before the meeting to help the new person find this thing, navigate them through the process to see that if they had the collective understanding or their own understanding. Do you have your own understanding or do you have the collective understanding? How do you know the difference? Can you show me what you're talking about? Oh, you can't show me what you're talking about? Then it's singular. Right? Collective is, can I carry this message and show you what I'm talking about, right? Same with the traditions or anything like that. So, where was I going with this? So things started showing up like George showed up in my life without me realizing it with Jerry, and they got me into this thing. So then I started praying how I could be of service, and the weird stuff started to happen. I was sitting in a meeting, and God, who can I help today? 2 people beside me on both sides. Anybody coming back, they both put up their hand. Right? God, how can I be of service today? I'm driving down the road and I get a flat tire. The guy that helps me needs to get sober. So not everything bad is not necessarily bad. Sometimes you need to just slow down enough so it's the person that you're supposed to help, because we get the memo. Somebody else is making the phone call, we get the memo. Right? And we don't have to know what the memo says. We just have to answer the phone. Just like Ebby answered the phone when this divine inspiration or whatever you want to call it said, give Bill a call. Right? And then the doctor witnessed this thing and it all started happening. So as I started going through this, if I'm trusting and relying on God, right, or this power, this intuition, how I cultivate that is in my 9s and an 11. Right? If I'm cultivating, learning to listen, to quiet my mind, where I move past the cheese factory into this consciousness, the most weirdest things start to happen. So I remember this one time I don't take day calls. Like I moved from private section back into the movies and doing movie sets and stuff like that, and I don't usually take day calls. But I took a day call. I don't usually, it's just one day. I usually get on the show and I stay on the show. So something said, take the call. I said, they said, hey, Tony, you want to take this call? I said, I don't use it. I said, okay, I'll take the call. Right? Part of me said no. The big part of me said yes. So I went to this location, and I walk into this store. So I'm at a big warehouse. I open the door, and you know, the light shine. The warehouse is dark, and there's a bit of light happening over in the section, and there's a guy sitting on a big pile of plywood, sitting in the middle of the stages. Huge. And as I walk in, he recognizes me halfway through. I haven't recognized him yet. He says, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Then I seen who it was. Hey, how you doing? He says, you know what? I was just sitting here asking God for help and direction. He says, I'm at the end of my rope. I don't know what to do and all that stuff. He says, I'm totally... And look who showed up. Weird, eh? A coincidence. Kind of weird. So another time... It was where I went to Belize, and I got to travel, and so I was working for this guy as a personal assistant without getting into too many details. So I'm over in Belize and making sure he's okay and he's safe and stuff like that. So we're at this resort, one of his resorts, and so something said, so I'm over by the pool. Something said, go stand on the beach. I don't want to stand on the beach. Something said, go stand on the beach. Okay, I'll go stand on the beach. This is me and God talking, right? I don't know anybody, just me. Get that intuitiveness. So I go stand on the beach, and I stand there and says, no, up a bit further. I said, does it really? They said, yes, up a bit further. So I stand there, how's this, right? Like a 6-year-old guy. So I'm standing there, and I said, okay, is this long enough? I said, no, just keep standing here. I said, this is stupid. I'm just letting you know my personal, I don't know what you're up to, but okay, I'm standing here. And this is cool. So I see this guy way in the distance. He's walking down the beach. He's staring at the beach. He's looking at his feet. And he would have walked right into me. Like, oh, sorry. And I said, how you doing? I said, how you doing? He says, I've been excommunicated from my church. Just got out of jail. He says, God wants nothing to do with me, and my life's over. So he's on the verge, but I used to work as an emergency care worker, psych assessment, a whole different thing. He's at the verge of talking about ending it. He's excommunicated from his church. He's kicked off the main island. Nobody wants nothing to do with him. Now he thinks God wants nothing to do with him. And it was funny. I said, well, God has me standing here to talk to you about this relationship that I formulated with this power. And he wants to know that you're loved and looked after and well cared for. I didn't know he was an alcoholic, but I knew that my experience would be enough to shape his newfound, maybe the prospect of a different experience was available for him. Kind of weird, eh? Another time, again, I'm over on Maui, and I had to, I just wanted to go to a meeting and let them know I was from out of town. You know what I mean? Anybody ever travel? Anybody from out of town? Yeah. Yeah, some of you identifying, right? So I go huffing it, like, you know, it's like a country mile. They said, oh, where's this place? Oh, just 4 blocks that way, 4 miles, right? So I huff it there 7 o'clock at night, and I'm thinking, yay. And they said, oh, no, that meeting's, and then nobody's showing up, and I look at the drink, 7 a.m. I said, oh, damn. I huffed it all the way home at the hotel. And I'm really, I get up 6 o'clock, and I'm going to huff it to this meeting. And I huff it all the way back to that meeting. I'm standing, waiting. The guy comes by and says, oh, there's no meeting today. It's a holiday. I said, I'm out of my mind, right? I'm out of my mind. I go all the way back. I go upstairs. My wife goes, you back already? I says, I said, I don't know what God has planned for me, but he has something planned for me. So I said, the conditions are putting me in a position of having me do whatever I got to do. She says, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to go smoke a Cuban cigar by the water. She goes over by the tree. I said, yeah. So there was a palm tree and nice green grass, and I smoke a cigar and meditate and talk to God. So I'm heading down the stairs. Something said, go over to the breakwater. I don't want to go over to the breakwater. I want to go over where there's nice and green grass and really enjoy my cigar. Someone says, no, go over and sit on the wall. So there's a lava rock going around this one of the museum pieces, and then the beach went down, and then there was breakwater, all lava rocks. So probably from here to the back room, I'm sitting on the wall, and I'm having a cigar. And I see this guy down there, and he's going like this. His arms are waving and all this. I thought, oh, my God, I hope that everything's okay. He's having a conversation with somebody. So he comes walking by me. He goes, how you doing? I said, good. He says, you want a snow cone? I said, snow cone? Where are you going to get a snow cone this time of morning? He says, no, we call them beers. I said, no, that's okay, thanks. So I thought he went over into the sand. Why it wasn't beside him is beyond me. He went into the sand, picked up the snow cone, the beer. He came back and he stopped and he looked at me. He went, I don't know why I'm talking to you. He says, I was just down there talking to God. I said, it looked like quite the conversation. Right? He says, he was arguing. Why my life, blah, blah. He says, my wife just left me, right? And I was down there talking to God why he abandoned me. And I said, oh, yeah. And he says, I was sober 8 years. I've been back drinking. And I said, well, allow me to introduce myself. I said, I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. God brought me here from Vancouver. Well, what the funny part about that story is, he was from the other side of the island. He didn't want to run into anybody he knew. He came all the way from the other side of the island to sit at that spot. God had me sitting over at that spot so we could meet. Now, if I would have argued with God to a point where I would have went and did what I wanted to do, regardless of that intuitiveness, got to the my marching order said, go over here, but I didn't see the sense of going over there, but I went over there anyways, reluctantly. Anybody picking up on the mill here? And it was the connection. So that's our job, right? To be a maximum service. And sometimes our marching orders are, hey, go to this meeting. Show up early. Why? None of your business. You'll be told when you get there. Because there's somebody there saying, I don't believe in God. It doesn't matter. You'll be contacted shortly, right? We don't care what you believe. We already know you're, because we were there too, right? That's why, nowhere in the book does it ask you, like a good big book study doesn't go, what do you think? Do you understand what they're saying? If you can't reiterate what they're saying, it's not a discussion on what they're saying. It's not open to interpretation. It's open to an understanding. The big books no, it's not. It's their experience. How is their experience open to interpretation? They all agree on it. This is their experience. Do I understand what they're saying? That's the purpose of a study. Do I understand what they're saying? The other purpose for a meeting, what's the purpose of a meeting? That people can come here with their problems and find a solution to it. We're not problem-oriented, we're solution-oriented. That means the members who have been through, how am I applying spiritual principles sufficient enough for me to have a different experience? Our experience, strength, and hope. Right? Not catchphrase, bumper sticker, here, throw, like sticking baloney up against the wall, right? Here, throw this at it, right? Because you got guys like me who come here that don't know they're as sick as they are. They don't know that they don't know. Right? And they really mean well. I remember this one time, and it was shared at meetings. And remember, I'm only going with my own thinking. I have nothing else to compare it to. Like me, and I remember this one time, I finally I was on bail. I'm on a 3-day drunk. I come off the Gardner Expressway. I got a 26er between my legs. I'm smoking a motivational cigarette. Right? Keep me up for 3 days, right? And I'm on bail, and I come off the Gardner Expressway, and there's a spot check. I remember putting that cigarette in the ashtray, sitting. I couldn't even roll down to get the sweet grass smell out of my car. And I said, "Dear God, God negotiate me, God, get me out of this one." And by the time I got from here 15 feet, I'll get a haircut. Anybody negotiate with God? I'll get a haircut. I'll go back to the church. I'll do this. I'll do anything. The situation's severe. Anybody? Severe. My God, it's dire straits. And this is where we go when we come to meetings. We got a short window, right? Because after a week, can I share? Please do. We've been hoping and waiting. so I remember, dear God, and they waved me through. You think I said, thank you, God? I picked up the cigarette and I went, whew, that was close. That's what we're dealing with. Right? Remember, they're very ill, right? And so what happens is we start working with them, and sometimes it takes a bit of time, right? And collectively, if we're carrying this message, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon a unity. If we're all working in unison, that means, where's our message? Our message is in the big book. That's the program. This is the fellowship. It may be that simple. Are you in a big book study? Is your sponsor big book based? Did you qualify yourself yet? Do you have this problem? Can you explain it to me? Where did you get that idea from? Do you have a big book? Yes. Do you know where it is? No. So it's very important. The other thing is, what did you hear me saying? Because what they heard you saying and what you're saying isn't the same thing. Because some of us are a little, anybody remember when you were new? I remember when some of you were new. I'm still glad you're here, considering what you had to work with. But, well, come on, think about it. You're dealing with life-threatening illness, that you're the only one who don't know the severity of it. Your story is different than everybody's story around you. How long did it take you to see the same story that everybody around you's seen? And it took the steps to see it, because you would have never been able to see it on that level of that level of that moment of clarity is crippling, and it's a moment, right? Driven by 100 forms of fear and self-delusion. As long as you know who you're working with, they don't have to know. All they know is that we're more happy to see them than they are to see us. And we know what's available to them where they have no clue. And our job is just to keep them walking with us, keep them kind of engaged, keep them kind of encouraged. Where are you in the book? How's that coming? Ask them some questions, engage. If you sponsor them and they're unwilling to do certain things, get rid of them. So when you've done these things, give me a call, because my job is to participate in the saving of your life, but I need your participation. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a marriage counselor. I'm not a financial advisor. If you're looking for an answer to get over the thing that's killing you, I could walk you through the same course of action that was given to me. I can't waste my time on you because there's 4 other people still in the water, right? And so, I hope I really needed to hear what I had to say today. I hope some of you got I don't know, did you want to do, was there any questions or anything? Yeah, so what happens is, this week, just interesting, right? This week, as you listen in meetings, listen to how many people talk about the promises, the carrot, right? And God and all these things before the person's even qualified as having the problem. Look at how many people say their first meeting that they're alcoholic. How do they know I was alcoholic before I came here? Maybe you were afflicted with the illness before you came here, but you need to find out what that illness is here. Right? My own solution, my own ideas. That's what like a lot of us will get the God thing happening before they even qualified as having a problem. So they'll start feeling good too soon. I got this. Promises are coming true. Well, what did you do to get them? 90 meetings in 90 days. You'll be amazed before you're halfway through. So that's about 45 days, right? But you listen, how many people, right? Like you did, just the mere fact that you're sober, surrounded by people that will tolerate you makes you feel good. And we confuse that with change. A lot of us confuse hope with the psychic change or spiritual experience. Well, what did you do to get it? Oh, meetings. Oh, okay. Oh, you're reading page 417 every morning. All good. You got acceptance going. All good. Surrender. What did you do in the book? What book? The big book, where the steps are, the instructions to the steps. Where are you in that process? Oh. Does that kind of make sense? So a lot of us is this your first time in AA? In recovery? Okay, so you're probably hooked up with this guy? Oh, we're friends. Oh, yeah, okay. I remember my first sponsor, right? Yeah, I kind of went about 3 months in. Do you want to sponsor me? He just smiles. Yeah, okay. Right? Because he picked me. I didn't pick him. Everybody I picked, yeah. So Chuck used to say, hang around with people that like you. They'll find you. You don't have to find them. And if you, right? And so like I was told to join the home group that I don't like anybody in. I joined the maritime group. I didn't like none of those guys, but because they're all like me. I used to want to hang around where all the money was. Yes, I want what you got. Forget it. Wife's not looking bad. No, I totally, I was nuts, right? And so they go right to God. Nothing wrong with praying with God, but until you get the solution as outlined, you're pretty much hooped, right? And a lot of us aren't well when we get here. I don't know, we're not running for politicians. All of a sudden we start getting our nose out of joint because some people get here, they're not right in the head. FYI, none of us are. It's a good day when our cheese and cracker are on the same plate, yes? Yeah. It's step 12 is the beginning of allowing other people to have this experience. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. We've already experienced some form of change. We've gone through a process. Now we're trying to carry this message. Is that what? It's okay. I tell guys, don't worry about it this time. Do it when you come back. Okay. Okay. So I'll get honest now. Not that I've been bullshitting, but I'll get honest. If you don't have the fundamental urgency inside to this is what it looks like. If you've been in the water, if you were all in a shipwreck and we're all in the water and we're dying, right? When we get put in a lifeboat, we're still dying. We need first aid. So they bring us back to the main ship and they deal with the hypothermia and all that other stuff and the blue lips, right? They deal with all those symptoms and we recover from the condition that was imposed on us in the water and outside the water, yes? So you get out of there, and as you're leaving, you hear people still in the water. And then you see the TV room. Right? So the gratitude is an act, something that comes from within. You can't fabricate that. Right? And that's what this change happens. It moves from the cheese factory into a demonstration of these things, where we're compelled and moved by the idea that was so freely given to us, right, and what we experience, and the idea of somebody else still being in the water doesn't sit well with me sitting at home. I developed a life, but my responsibilities have never changed. I still, 34 years sober, I do 3 big book studies a week, not including my home group and service position and voting and all that stuff, and I have a phenomenal life. Married and all that other stuff, career, work, all that other stuff. Most of my sponsees who I sponsor are very heavily involved in fellowship, right? Thoughts and concerns of other people because we're dealing with people's lives, right? Most of you know Renee, he's pretty busy, right? Because he needs to for a guy in his mental condition. He needs to stay busy, right? and that's what it is because he gets to experience the same level of gratitude, right? Contentment, serenity, peace. It's a life well lived to watch other people recover, to see them recreate their lives is an experience we must not miss. So if you haven't had the change, you can't explain it to somebody. They won't see the necessity of it. If they've experienced the change, you can't stop them getting involved. Bill, lying in the hospital, probably the second most selfish guy other than me, right? His friend came to visit him. Think about this. He's sitting at the table. Think of him sitting, second time in treatment. He's sitting there smoking, drinking. The table and all this stuff, yellow fingers, dying of alcoholism. His friend came to visit him. He pushed a drink across the table. How level of self-centered is that? Unmindful of his well-being. Hey, you want a drink? Right? That's a few pages later, he went through this course of action that his friend took him through. He didn't go through it alone, and he didn't find it. Right? Nowhere does it say, hey, good luck. The reason we tell people to go find this is because there's more of them than there are us. There's more people who haven't been through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous in Alcoholics Anonymous than who have. So we're becoming a small percentage, the real alcoholic, right? And there's the only requirement for members is to stop drinking. So going back, as he lied in the hospital, so when he went through this process, what was the first thing that happened? He was to check his newfound thinking with a new God consciousness. He got lit up from the inside, where they talk about that on page 55. Deep down within every man, woman, and child is a fundamental idea of God, the life source that we got connected to, that we become more spiritual-based, having the human experience than we are instinct-based. Instinct-based is about me gathering, conquering, mine. When we become more spiritually based, is not only me, but making sure somebody comes with me when I get into the boat, right? And so as Bill lied there, think about that. As he lied in the treatment center, in the hospital, for the third time, the thought came to him that other people might benefit what was so freely given to him. You cannot fabricate that. You cannot mimic that. It's something that happens from within. Your level of service, the level of service is something that I can't see my life not doing. When I'm not doing, I'm missing something. I'm missing something that cannot be bought, cannot be bartered for. It has to come through a level of gratitude that's only done through service. I don't know if that explained it, but that's because think about this. Here's where I make more friends. I'm really trying to think of the wording here. Damn it, I haven't been thinking about it all day. Why not start now? If AA fellowship was at the level of gratitude that people talk about, you'd have to get back to going on a waiting list. So more people are full of shit in AA than not. Oh, did I say that? Oh, sorry. So they're hoping. This is what I'd like you to see, my stage character. Well, what are you doing? I make my home group. I put away my own chair. What a level of service. We should all kind of get to that level, all right? But when you think about it, our main job is to fit ourselves to be of service, to God and the people around us. It takes effort, takes discomfort, takes sleeping hours. Like it's really, but if your life depends on it, and then it's not because my life depends on it, it's because I've been given something that's so remarkable that I can't even put into words that if I lived another 40 years, I'd never be able to give back what I've been given. Right? So as I was, I'll restate it, is you get them to qualify them, meaning have you read We Agnostics? And then what people, I say, what's our understanding? Most people go, what? I say, what's our understanding of a power greater than ourselves? What's our understanding of the solution? What's the collective understanding of what we're offering as a solution here? What you get to do is choose your own conception of what we're talking about as our experience. If you look up the word conception, is formulating an idea or a game plan. Step 2 is our idea and our game plan. You need to understand what we're talking about before you could choose your own conception on what we're talking about. And if you haven't been through We Agnostics yet, you don't understand what we're talking about. Either if you can't read, I'll take you through it, I'll get you some CDs, I'll get you some talks, I'll get you something that because the whole basis of the whole thing is about an experience, not a religious idea. Nothing wrong with those things. It's about experiencing of tapping into an inner resource of strength. Well, ask most people the idea, where's our solution? It's within. Becomes personal, becomes something that so by the time I get them to being convinced we're at step 3, page 60, the rest of the book is designed that talks about their experience, but they need to do step 4 to see what we're talking about in the level of unmanageability or the, right, all the problems, right? So yeah, We Agnostics. Yeah, and they have that experience of the guy, his religious conviction. So most people who have those, talk themselves out of doing the work because they already think they have it. So a sponsor's job is, have you gone through it? Can I take you through it, or can I take you through it, right? Because we need to move past your ideas, and that's the best one. What's the collective understanding? Not your understanding. What's the collective understanding, right? Because it's about your experience. Everybody wants to talk about God as I understand him. Nobody cares how you understand him. I don't care. How many people care how other people? I don't care. What's your experience? Having had a spiritual experience. What's your experience? Well, I don't have no experience. I just want to share my ideas. Okay. Oh, boy. And that's how the argument starts, right? Why do they have it like that? Like, people get in their nose. You need to understand what we're talking about before you can formulate your own idea. And ask you to formulate your own idea and then apply that. You need to understand what we're talking about. Because I bet you $1 to donuts, not one of you would have came up with any of those ideas as they outlined there. Step 1, that I have an allergy. Not once did my friends ever sit in the bar going, I see why you drink the way you do. You have this phenomenon of craving, Tony. You have this allergy that makes you different than the rest of us. Never heard that once in the bar. Tony, I thought you were quitting. Yeah, well, see, because you have this malady that centers in the mind that places you beyond human aid, then unless you have a psychic change or spiritual experience, there's no way you'll continue to sit here. That this power, that lack of power is my dilemma. Where and how was I to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. Meaning, I'll close with this. Ready? So, if in step 1 I have an alcoholic mind, and as long as that condition is present, I'll continue to drink. So the solution is the removal of that condition. How? Through a psychic change or spiritual experience. We haven't sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. That's the miracle of it. Yes, that's the whole point of doing this thing. Because after I have a psychic change or spiritual experience and a daily reprieve, do I still have an alcoholic mind? No, because I'll continue to drink. So in the book, they talk about a person that can't meet these conditions still has an alcoholic mind. There's something the matter with their spiritual condition. As long as this condition is present, we'll continue to drink. That's why I need a psychic change or spiritual experience. The problem gets removed. It doesn't exist. It doesn't make me neither cocky nor afraid. This is so long as I keep in fit spiritual condition. I have a daily reprieve from this condition returning. And if I don't maintain my relationship with this power where it becomes personal in the love and service of other people, the insanity returns, the condition returns. But first you have to be exempt. A lot of people are in the holding pattern, meaning in between drinks. You hear people say, I'm just as far as you are. Whoever got up earlier this morning is most right. What a bunch of horse shit. Oh, did I just say that out loud? Sorry. So what happens is we have a solution here that puts us in a different playing field than we were when we first got here. Right? When you think about the miracle of alcoholics, it's pretty extraordinary what we have here. We were dying of this thing. And something happened beyond anything we could ever imagine. And that's it for the time. But I love you guys. We'll talk after.